Hidden Object Guru here. Let's take a look at the various interviews that Will Byles did when he was doing the first big promotional push for the Quarry last month. There are a couple of these. We're going to take a look at them and see if he said anything super interesting, or at least anything intriguing. This first one comes from Games Radar Plus and is written by Joe Donnelly. It's not a straight interview, it's a preview with some quotes that they got from Will Byles. So we're just going to have to glean through. Okay. Yikes, a detached head on a stick. That's really creepy. But yes, the story he's telling here about a detached head on a stick is because they were filming this in LA, right? Because all of the motion capture was done by Digital Domain, so they could have the unbelievably high quality facial capture stuff. But unfortunately, COVID happened, and I have to assume why that's this. Sorry, I have to assume that's why this game is coming out in 2022 instead of 2021 when it's set, because of the COVID pushback. But yeah, and so to direct the scenes, he had to do them from an iPad, like that episode of Community. So yikes, that can't have been ideal. And I'm really looking forward to the behind the scenes footage of what it was like directing that. I really hope they've done like a mini featurette about the challenges of making this kind of a movie with like lots of actor participation during COVID. Okay, he eventually got there is the point. Spiritual successor to Until Dawn, that's a nice way to describe it. I do like the star-studded open-ended narrative. Open-ended is a really weird way, like I don't mean to critique the article too much, but like it's not open-ended, like it's got multiple endings. It's not the same thing. Screams David Arquette, Modern Family's Ariel Winter, and A Nightmare on Elm Street's Lynn Shay, which is like such a weird thing to describe her as, because yeah, she's in A Nightmare on Elm Street, because Lynn Shay is Bob Shay's like little sister, and Bob Shay ran New Line, which is the company that produced Nightmare on Elm Street. But it's like, apart from being in a huge amount of New Line movies because her brother ran New Line, she's also got a really successful career for herself and is most iconic as the creepy lady from the Insidious movies. So really weird way to describe it. All right, here's the thing. Boom. Referencing Friday the 13th, obviously, summer camp slasher, Deliverance, and The Hills Have Eyes, both of which are about killbillies. So yeah, obviously. And as he says, I'm not going to give it away because it'll be a spoiler, but there's also a creature in there as well. Is it a werewolf? Is it a mutant? Is it some kind of a person who has been so horribly, monstrously altered by being captured by killbillies that they've turned into a monster? Like the thing in The Woman? Who can say? I mean, we will be able to very soon. Okay, let's see. Okay, this next part of the preview is fascinating because it's crediting the popularity of streaming and people having, 2 billion views of Until Dawn on YouTube as encouraging them to add in all of the modes that make it so you don't have to play the game. That's really interesting. Because it's suggesting here that the third-person exploration is optional, over-the-shoulder combat is optional, QTEs is optional, and even the decision-making is optional. So, wow? I mean, I kind of got the sense of that with movie mode, but actually, because this is suggesting that it's piecemeal. And I don't know that it's actually piecemeal. I'm going to want to see more from the settings screen because, yeah, you can turn QTEs to easy, which will probably be, the one-button QTEs from Little Hope and House of Ashes. And probably even the game pauses until you press the QTE button from House of Ashes and Little Hope. So probably, actually no, I guess that was in Man of Medan as well, wasn't it? Yep, because I remember the game locking up when the button input didn't work. So it also had that in Man of Medan. There was a glitch where it wasn't recognizing my inputs, and because, like, you can't time out a QTE, if there's no timer, if you've turned off the timer, so the game had essentially locked up. It was quite frustrating. But anyway, this is going to be interesting because it's suggesting that you can turn off all of those modes whenever you want. And yeah, I'm definitely intrigued to see how that goes. Yeah, and as you say, look, a Bandersnatch type thing, which I love that. I mean, I'm not saying this guy doesn't know his interactive movies, but it is kind of weird that the place he goes is to Black Mirror's Bandersnatch. You know what? There's a whole genre of games that have no gameplay other than the decisions, really. So, but that's a long tradition that goes way before Bandersnatch. But yeah, like turning off the exploration but leaving the decision, so it's not really movie mode because you're still making choices, that could be really interesting. And now we get to the part where Will Byles is actually talking about it. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and I hadn't heard this one before. So Will Byles here is talking about what kind of movie you want it to be, and he talks about the three options we know about: everyone lives, everyone dies, and of course Gorefest, where situations are contrived to get only the bloodiest possible deaths for every character. And he calls it a fairly dark path. Yeah, I would imagine. But here's the interesting part. Check out this one. So this person's fairly grumpy, they're argumentative, they're clumsy, they're this and then that. We saw that in the video about how the different modes work. Like that was in the IGN preview. But the second part of this is fascinating. He's telling us that just like Gorefest mode, they're going to have DLC. Are we gonna have to pay for this? With different modes later. And he says that are going to allow streamers to tailor their games for their audiences. What does that mean exactly? Like, are there going to be guides for how to get certain scenes, or is he just talking about different things like Gorefest that have specific narratives they want to pre-tailor and tell the various streamers to do these settings, or you pre-select a mode? Are they going to have exclusive scenes that only happen a certain way? Like, this is very interesting. This is the first I've heard about DLC offering different ways to watch it, other than, of course, Gorefest. Like, if they're going to do a bunch more of those, I'm very intrigued, and it makes me wonder. So you know how in House of Ashes, I mean, what's a good example of this? In House of Ashes, there are like really rare scenes that you have to do an absurd amount of choices to do. And so that's why, you know, we're 6 months on and we're still seeing, I can't believe that happened moments in House of Ashes. Obviously, the Quarry is going to have things like that, but the question is it also going to have stuff that you can only see by using these DLC paths? That's why I keep wanting a straight answer on, can you make Gorefest happen yourself? Or are there deaths that are exclusive to Gorefest? And until we get a straight answer on that, I'm going to be asking incessantly. Okay, this part gets really interesting because they're saying that they got in the casting pretty much everyone they wanted first. And I mean, obviously, with your Lynn Shays, your Grace Zabriskis, and especially your Lance Henriksen's and Ted Raimis, you're going to write a part with those people in mind. So I get where he's saying that. But now we're getting something weird, which is they cast based on a 90-minute version of the script they wrote. This suggests that the screenplay's development started with them just writing The Quarry as a standard slasher film, casting based on that, and then going back and writing the 10-hour... I mean, okay, so take out all of the walking around and most of the action scenes. So just the conversations and the actual incidents that happen, we're probably talking about 4 or 5 hours, right? Like if you take out the exploration and the finding files and the going through menus and looking at premonitions, script's probably 4.5, 5 hours, something like that. Like, look at the prologue. if you took out all the gameplay stuff, her walking around, and just focused on the actual events that happen and the dialogue they say, that's still like 20 minutes. So you'd have to be, well, okay, not 20, probably like 15 minutes. And so in order to do a script version of that, like that would be massively pared down, because you can't have, you can't spend the first 15, 20 minutes of your slasher movie before meeting the main cast. I'm looking at you, terrible slasher movie Death Proof. You made the teaser kill slightly more than half of the movie. Get your act together, Quentin Tarantino. Anyway, the point is, they're suggesting here that like they wrote the 90 minutes, they cast that, and only after they had cast everybody did they sit down and write the volumes of dialogue. Because it's not just writing 4 hours, 5 hours worth of scripting, right? Because you have to have all of the dialogue variations based on what happens in the story. So just writing a 4-hour, 5-hour block of dialogue for a movie, you know, that's going to be 300 pages. But when you start putting in all of the various things that can happen in a scene, you're adding on hundreds and hundreds more pages of dialogue. So, yeah. Let's just say I am very intrigued at the possibility of getting my hands on that 90-minute, like 90-page, 90-minute, 1.5-hour screenplay version of The Quarry. You know, that they would send out to all the actors to try and cast them. That's going to be very interesting. And of course, he says here that he wants the, we don't want to add our own morality. We don't impress our beliefs in the audience. We just give them options and they get to make their moral choices. That is the goal. And I think they've done a pretty good job of that generally in the past. But let's see how this plays out in the game, huh? Okay, and now we've got, I think, the key paragraph that I find most interesting here is he's given, like, right after saying, we're not going to impress our own morality onto this game, he immediately follows that up with his, we're doing a selfish arc and a selfless arc. And I'm like, well, using that term kind of implies morality. Because being selfless, as a general rule, is better than being selfish. That's why we call it selfish. But anyway, but I do like the idea of them being non-judgmental, but I can't imagine that anybody's going to get an ending they're satisfied with if everyone is constantly only looking out for themselves and running for safety, leaving everyone else behind. But we're going to see. I am very interested. And he talks a little about disconnection, because you're making the choices, but it's the characters doing it, so you are absolved of moral responsibility for that character's actions, which is, of course, something you can have a long debate about. I think it's too simple to get in here, but he's interestingly saying that it might be worth, how shall we put this, a psychological investigation into the ways that people distance themselves from that kind of thing. Next up, we have Game Informer's article by Blake Hester, which again is a preview with some quotes, so let's focus on the quotes. So here's Will Byles' quote about this feeling very 80s. It is a very helpless era, it's quite an innocent era. That is such a weird thing to say about the 1980s. But I guess he's referring to the fact that one of the characteristic things about 80s horror is the way the victims in the horror film really do seem like they're living perfect lives and don't imagine any threat could come to get them. It is very much you can talk about 1980s and the false ideas of American exceptionalism and, you know, everyone having these suburban dream lives that are then invaded by monsters, and, you know, the famous right-wing association and Reaganism to that. And I kind of like the idea of taking that to the present day, because he's right to say that modern horror doesn't feel that way. But you know what? 70s horror didn't feel that way either. So it's very strange that we had this, like, Halloween, which is 77, 78, but still, like, earlier 70s horror. Really bleak stuff, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Deliverance, yeesh, right? Where the whole world is crumbling and horror is inevitable, right? Everything's coming down and things are just getting worse and worse, is that mindset. And now you've got the 80s where it's like, oh no, everything's fine, but then a killer gets you. And and then of course 90s and on, we have self-referential horror and, let's face it, horror about people who don't care whether they live or die. Like, horror got real bleak, everybody. So yeah, having a return to a bunch of kids out to have fun and then there's a monster running around. Yeah, that could be a blast. In this paragraph, they call Will Byles Byers. I am sure that I have done similar things. So I just want to say I don't judge them too harshly, but you should try to proofread stuff. I know I should. Okay, and now I'm going to critique the article one more time. Byles says the Quarry has plenty of camp, which makes sense given the source material. No pun intended. Yes, it is 100% intended. You intended to make that pun, and then you made a pun. Why are you shying away from the play on words? Is this a thing where literally means figuratively now? Like, the way journalists are using the term no pun intended means they intended to make a pun? Because that's the only thing I can get out of that. And of course, we got Maslow's pyramid of needs, or hierarchy of needs. The idea being that only when the bottom row of like food and drink and shelter and survival are taken care of can you start worrying about the bigger stuff. And in this segment, he's kind of implying a Deliverance style, when you pull away all of the comforts of society, we find out who people really are thing. Because as he said, they all start at the top of the pyramid. They're all living comfortable lives and just trying to be themselves and enjoy themselves, self-actualization. And then he's going to strip all that away one by one and find out who they are underneath. Which, you know what? Fine. That is a perfectly, you can say, well, that's a little pretentious for your campy slasher game. But you know what? That's just how you structure character arcs. So I completely get why he would compare it to that, even if it does seem, slightly on the pretentious side when you can just talk more about Deliverance, because that's what he's talking about. Next up is Rob Lean's article from the Radio Times. Hunted by blood-drenched locals and something far more sinister. I know that comes from one of the press releases, but something far more sinister. That would suggest there's only one werewolf running around. Or, I say werewolf. We have no idea what the monster is. I'm just using that as a short form for the monster that appears within the prologue. But, they could just be meaning that figuratively. Like, something far more sinister, i.e. the threat that werewolves posed. Not literally one werewolf. Okay, now we've got a clip from an interview talking about hick flick. Ugh. Why? I don't know why he insists on saying that when the perfectly functional term, the killbilly genre exists. I always like to use killbilly because it gets you right to the point of what you're trying to say. But I do like the idea of him referencing Spinal Tap with Until Dawn dialed up to 11, which, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Thank you, Will Byles. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because he talks about how fun it is to get to meet David Arquette and Ted Raimi and Lynn Shay and Grace Zabriskie, and it's like how having these horror luminaries make it feel like a real project. And the subtext there is, in a way that, this is mean to say, but in a way that Until Dawn didn't. Because, let's face it, I love Until Dawn, you probably love Until Dawn if you're watching this, but it's not like it's full of horror luminaries. It has Larry Fessenden, and it has Peter Stormare, and that's it. Whereas this is much more packed with people who are really, really, really well known in the genre. But what's even more interesting is he starts talking about the slight postmodern self-referential aura, Scream, right? And the understanding that the characters in a horror movie know the rules of horror movies. And what I love is this quote, and we use that a lot. We use that as part of our choice-making systems. The understanding that people, in this context, our audience, knows the rules of horror. Meaning, they might actually be trying to trick us if we try to outthink them. Like, remember that scene in Until Dawn where there's the fake Jessica voice coming out of the trapdoor and everyone at home is like, no, don't open the trapdoor. What is wrong with you? No, 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 no. And of course, unless they hate Ashley, in which case, by all means, open the trapdoor and kill Ashley. Ashley sucks. But the point is, are they going to try and double bluff us? Give us situations where they're expecting us to act a certain way based on the fact that we know we're in a horror movie, only they've got something more complicated planned. Because if so, that could be really exciting. And it's an interesting thing for him to specifically reference here. All right, now we get to the spiritual successor stuff. Teen horror, yup. The same kind of number of characters. It's actually got one more character. Does it though? Hearing about 9 playable characters this whole time. Is there a 10th character? Or has he forgotten that you play as Beth at the start of Until Dawn? I've heard a lot of people talk about the 8 playable characters in Until Dawn, and they all seem to like forget that Beth is controllable for the first 20 minutes of the game. Like you're playing as Beth. There are 9 playable characters in Until Dawn. Of the main cast, there's only 3 people you don't play as, and that is, of course, Flamethrower Guy, Dr. Hill, and Hannah. Like, you play as everybody else, including Beth. All right, everyone can live, everyone can die, we all know that. And of course, the third state, which I won't go into too much because it's a little bit of a spoiler. Now, this is the second time in these interviews he's specifically talked about a spoiler having to do with this, and this is why so many people, including myself, are like, oh, so it's werewolves, and the third state is you get turned into a werewolf. Because he's not saying the nature of the monster is a spoiler, and he's not saying what the third end state for characters is, because it's a spoiler. Now, to me, that would tend to suggest turned into a monster, but we don't honestly know. Like, they could be, the third end state could be, you get killed, you escape, or you get kidnapped by killbillies. Like, what if ending up in a killbilly's stew pot, or as part of their creepy slave games, what if that is the third end state? Like, I think it's transformation, because, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and the tagline being, you won't believe what you'll become. They kind of suggest, like, a literal transformation rather than just a metaphorical one, but we still can't say for sure, even though this does lean really heavily in that direction. Also, it's nice to see him not just talking about Friday the 13th, but also Sleepaway Camp. Although Sleepaway Camp isn't the best example for this kind of thing because, you know, it's a much weirder, messier movie than I'm sure they're trying to do here. Now we get into why isn't this a dark picture, which is actually a good question, because you'd think, well, even if it was a super long game, they could make it a dark picture spin-off, and the answer is no, they're doing something else. And he says that the key part is, and who knows, this could just be PR, but it's interesting that what he says the main difference is tonal, right? And that's very interesting to me because it's true. Like, for better or for worse, I think it's for better. I love the things. The dark pictures are 100% serious stories. Like, yeah, you'll get characters quipping, but they don't quip a ton. And that's not really what it's about. Like, when they say something funny, it's born out of the gallows humor in that situation or joking around before anything scary happens. But once the horror starts, it's horror through and through. Whereas what he seems to be saying here by comparing it to Buffy and Supernatural is that even though we haven't really seen these in the trailer, we can expect horror moments to be undercut, deflated, twisted to the side by giving us comic relief moments within the overall structure. And I gotta say, that is incredibly interesting. Like, actually having more of a tonal, as he says here, Buffy and Supernatural. But you gotta remember, this is R-rated. So I'm thinking more, can we expect this to be more like James Gunn Slither type of thing? Because that's who was doing R-rated horror with a bit of wit and comedy to it, before he got entirely into superheroes and made the world a better place with Peacemaker. But yeah, a stylistic thing. And I do like the message here, that it's like an old film studio where you have different sorts of tones for different things. And he's like, the idea that Supermassive Games is known for horror interactive movies, and yet, even though that's their niche, they're gonna do massively different types of horror interactive movies while doing horror interactive movies. That's super exciting, and Will Byles is right to be psyched about it. Also, it's worth mentioning that, as he implies here, because it's an anthology, in order to do the Quarry, they've seemingly had, because this is a 3-year development cycle on the Quarry, and we know they've been planning the Dark Pictures for like 6 years, right? And it had 3 years before Man of Medan. So as he says here, it's not like you can just slot the Quarry into the anthology, because the anthology is like building something bigger than each individual game. So you can't just drop in another game without breaking the flow of the anthology. Is that true, or is that spin? I don't know, but I'm excited to find out. All right, here's where we get to the famous 186 ending quote. And again, that's interesting. They talk about how audiences are coming to expect, multiple endings. Not just who lives and who dies, but actually different ways it can play out. And what fascinates me is Man of Medan, right, was supposed to have 3 completely different endings. One, Alec's path, where he can stab somebody or stab himself, and he gets the carburetor back from, distributor cap, back from Olsen's body. 2, the fight with the sledgehammer in the hold. I don't know why I was reaching for the word hold. In the hold, right, where Olsen can get crushed. And 3, you can have the wonderful, if you haven't seen it, go, I've got a video of it up, the original ending where the boat was supposed to catch on fire and everything was supposed to explode, and you were going to have a scene where like the gas gets activated and everyone starts seeing flashes of whatever nightmare they had during the game. Like, they didn't get a chance to finish it because they would have had to do a lot of work, and they would have had to come up with animation for the boat exploding, so they didn't do it. But the point is, it was supposed to have 3 different endings, and in the version we played, it had 2. Little Hope, 1 possible ending. House of Ashes, 1 possible ending. Like, no matter how bad you are at House of Ashes, you are always ending up in the same final fight, right? And no matter how badly you play Little Hope, you're always gonna end up back at the house with at least one other character. And, they're co-op games. And he kind of begs off saying whether he's going to have multiple endings here. And so I don't think we can expect majorly different multiple endings. I think the endings are going to come down to who's alive and how they contribute, not like different situations, completely different finales. Because as he says, right, he structures it like spokes on a wheel, where the story doesn't stop because somebody gets killed. The story just keeps right on going because we've got 9 protagonists, right? So if somebody dies an hour and the rest of the structure is still there, nobody's getting killed in the first hour of one of these games. Come on, Will. As if. But the whole spokes of a wheel thing, right, where they're all leading towards the same point, does suggest that we're only getting 1 grand finale, we're only getting 1 ending. I'm fine with that. I know a lot of people wish they would have greater variety in how the ending can play out. Personally, I'm fine with Until Dawn always ending with Wendigos in the lodge, but I get that is controversial for some people, and they would like to see more variety. these quotes suggest that, yeah, we're not going to be getting that. We're going to get different end states, and we're going to get different epilogues for the characters. As he says, the ending cards with 186 possible cards for all 14 characters. I'm guessing Eliza doesn't have cards, but who the hell knows, right? But yeah, don't expect there to be huge variety in ending based on the way he's describing this. Or for like a death to completely change how the ending plays out, like how in Detroit Become Human, a bunch of people can get killed, and then you just don't get to play a third of the game, or even more than half of the game, depending on who got killed. This is just paragraphs of him talking about how great the facial capture is now. Apparently the test they did was Grace Zabrisky's character, Eliza, which is fascinating. And as he says, you can get the nuance of facial expressions in a way that you just didn't have the ability to when they were making Until Dawn. He thinks it's a game changer, and I think the faces look great in the game so far, but I don't know how much I'm going to say it's a complete game changer for video game presentation of actors' performances until I've seen the actual game. That said, I have been telling everyone who will listen that Ted Raimi is fantastic in this game, entirely based on his 2 scenes from the prologue, so I think they might have already sold me on this one. Also, it's worth noting that he promises here that like all of the complex facial animation, all of the great stuff, it's all real time being done by the Unreal Engine. So yeah, that is pretty impressive. And if they're still doing this with Unreal Engine 4, imagine what Unreal Engine 5 is going to wind up looking like. Yeah, they're really blazing a fascinating path. Now here he's talking about the difficulty options, which we've already covered elsewhere, that you set up the characters and you just watch it play out. Here's where he talks about the death rewinds, about how you get 3 of them. And as he says, there's hundreds of deaths in the game, so 3 doesn't make much of a tangible difference to your story. Yeah, but it's like a lot of those deaths you wouldn't see in a normal playthrough because they'd be based, you would have the opportunity to have them based on decisions you made earlier. But more importantly, I haven't had a straight answer about whether we're going to be able to load chapters in this game. And if I load, so let's say I finish the game and it's recorded all my choices and I want to jump back to chapter 6. Do I get my 3 death rewinds back when I start at chapter 6? Or do I only have any death rewinds I had when I got there? And I know, I'm just talking about YouTube stuff and farming kill animations so I can see all of them, which, okay, that's disturbing and I probably shouldn't do it, but I'm going to. And I'm not the only one, by the way. It just raises the question, is that something that you're going to be able to do? Or do you have to restart the whole game to get your kill rewinds back? Sorry, death rewinds back. Yeah, this is something I definitely want an answer to. Like, the game comes out in 2 months today when I'm recording it. This video, so he has time to explain this, but it's like, what happens if you watch the whole movie in movie mode? Can you then go to an early chapter, but now I'm playing it from this time and making some slight different decisions? Because that would be a game changer. Like, you make the choices for movie mode, and then you get to the end and you're like, back in chapter 6, back in act 6 of this story, I didn't like what a couple of people did. I wish that had played out differently. Are you going to have to restart the whole, because the thing is, you can't like restart the whole game with characters making different decisions, because then it won't be the same movie anymore. So can I go back to chapter 6 and just pick up the control and start playing it from chapter 6 based on my outcomes and decisions the characters made in the movie mode? Or is the movie mode like a locked away thing, where it exists as it does, and it doesn't unlock things for you? So the death rewinds happen after you've beaten the game, right? But do you have to play the game, or like movie mode counts for that, right? Does it? Because you can't use the death rewinds in movie mode, but movie mode should unlock the death rewinds. Although now I'm saying, who's going to play it on movie mode the first time? And then I'm being arrogant, because yeah, there are definitely people who are going to play it on movie mode the first time who are excited about this mode. And I don't think that they should be left out, and I hope they're not. But yeah, he's not giving us straight answers on chapters, replayability, how the death rewind system works, and the thing that I'm most interested in, and I doubt we're going to get, But how great would it be, right, if you got to the end of the game? And I don't think this is going to be possible because the movie mode menu suggests all the characters need to act consistently over the course of the game, because you choose a personality type, whether they're clumsy and whether they like looking for items, right? And then they play consistently for the rest of the game. Whereas when you're playing it, you get to decide on the fly how everyone behaves, and consistency is up to you. Because at the last minute, you can maybe say, well, this person's been nice the whole game, suddenly they're going to be a dick, right? But in movie mode, that can't happen. So what I want to know is, when I get to the end of my playthrough that I actually played, and I know this is like, this should be possible, but it probably won't happen. Would I be able to like get a X amount of like a save file, or tradable save file, or a series of flags, or a long code of text? Probably not a long code of text, that would be a nightmare. All right, but that I could send to a friend and have them plug that into movie mode? And then they would essentially watch what I did in my playthrough happening as a movie mode. Like, they wouldn't watch me just wandering around as I want to do, but like all the key decisions I made, all the items I found, what happened to all the characters, they'd be watching my playthrough. And I gotta say, that seems like a really exciting idea, and they theoretically should have the possibility to do that, and I'm just wondering, are they going to? And I do love that the guy's like, this is going to be music to the ears of people that hate getting characters killed. No, it's music to the ears of people who want to see every death. Come on. We know who's going to be using the death rewinds. Next up, IGN. We've already seen a bunch of their coverage of the game. Let's look at their text and interview. Spiritual successor to Until Dawn. It's got to be weird doing the press junket as Will Byles, because... and this is not a criticism. Obviously, people are going to have a lot of the same questions. It's only natural that a lot of people are going to have the same questions. But it's got to be weird having to give basically the same answers over and over and over again. Although this is a weird answer, I will say that. Dark Pictures is obviously an anthology and has gone down a shared story route. Yeah, because they're co-op games. And a shorter format with higher cadence. And I think he meant frequency rather than cadence. But... he said cadence, and I'm like, should I look that up and make sure that I'm not defining that word wrong? Apparently not, because as he said, modulation or inflection of the voice, sequence of notes or chords, rhythm, a fallen pitch or tone at the end of a phrase or sentence. No, he meant frequency. Okay, I thought I was going crazy for a second there. Okay, I'm kind of blown away here, because he's talking about screaming, we all know the rules, and he's literally using the example I used earlier from Until Dawn to describe knowing the rules of horror. And it raises the question, are we going to get punished for knowing the rules of horror? Were you supposed to open that to get rescued when you heard a creepy sound behind it? And staying means, you know, somebody comes and whomps you from behind. Okay, that's kind of amazing that we use the same example. Although, really, what else? What other example are you going to use? Okay, that was literally the whole IGN article, like that little bit about, I thought it was going to be longer, but no, that was it. Just a little thing at the end here about explaining what the series is and talking about their reviews of the various games and linking to them. Apparently they think there's no guarantee the other 6 Dark Pictures games that have been trademarked, the 4 that we are assuming is Season 2, plus O-Death, plus Switchback, are, there's no guarantee they will all be turned into full games. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but that's a weirdly pessimistic way to phrase that. Also, I am sincerely hoping that as PSVR 2 buzz builds up, that we very soon get some kind of a huge reveal that, oh my god, Switchback is Rush of Blood 2. Again, I know that's slightly far-fetched, but I remain, I live in hope. And finally, we've got Bloody Disgusting's interview, which is the only one of these that's actually formatted like an interview. And thank you so much, Bloody Disgusting, for actually doing that and just like letting Will Byles speak for himself. Again, he's talking about the 90-page script thing, which really, really interested me. I need to see this 90-page script version. And he does mention something really fun here. Oh yeah, he liked Ted Raimi. But no, the really fun thing here is that the actors only get their parts of the story and their lines. Because yeah, I'd imagine it'd be pretty daunting to be like, here's 800 pages, like just hand them a phone book and a half. Here's 800 pages, scan through it looking for your character's name. No, that would be a nightmare as an actor, so I really like that. And I love that he says, we basically got everyone we wanted. And I'm like, who did you want and you didn't get? Because you said basically. That means you had somebody in mind and you couldn't get it, and I'm so desperate to find out who it is. They're also saying that it was motion captured with very little keyframe corrections made after the recording sessions, suggesting that, like, they locked down the script and filmed all of it and then didn't go back and do retakes. So you're really confident about that script if you didn't change anything when you were putting it together and editing it and see how it all worked together. So yeah, that is a confidence I am not used to. So way to go, guys, if you actually pulled that off. With Until Dawn being influenced by the films of Larry Fessenden, who also co-wrote the game Dark Pictures anthology born from films like Blair Witch Project and The Exorcist, what kind of media influenced The Quarry? I don't know that Until Dawn was influenced by the films of Larry Fessenden. Like, he did write it, but I don't think it was influenced by his films. Let me check something. Yeah, I just went and I checked his credits, and the man's written a lot of stuff and directed, and honestly, he's quite an accomplished actor, but he made a movie called Wendigo, and he made Last Winter, both of which are set in the snow, and again, one of them features Wendigo mythology, but like, they're not anything like Until Dawn in the least. So it's like, he wrote it, yeah, but I don't think people went to him because they were like, we need a film like a Larry Fessenden joint. Actually, I'd love to hear the story of how he got hired. That would be very intriguing to me. But like the kind of teen horror it is, it's not something he was known for in any way, shape, or form. And his take on Wendigo is very different from Until Dawn. Here we've got more about the anachronistic feel and that it should feel more like the 80s, which is, you know, why everyone is dressed like that. Crop tops abound. Although maybe those are back and I just don't know about it. He also thinks there's a lot of Evil Dead in the game, and I gotta say, whoever at Bloody Disgusting put this together is a genius, because they're like, I think there's a lot of Evil Dead in this game. Here's a picture of Dylan with his hand cut off. Like, yep, you nailed it. And here he's just saying, 2K gave us the money we needed to make an Until Dawn scale game. And he's saying they were hands off, but, well, plenty of freedom to basically do whatever we wanted within the horror genre. I love the sound of that. I don't know a lot about them as developers. I'd like to hear testimonials that they're good to work with, but he's saying they are, and I'm not going to claim he's being political. Let's just assume they were great to work with. Okay, here's something really fun. They ask what the writing process was like, and he doesn't really answer that, because he doesn't answer about the process at all, but the answer he gives about the tone and the experience of playing it is very interesting, because he's focused on the idea, and I've been here, so I know what he's talking about, and you might have as well, that you end up feeling guilty for doing something in a character in a game. And he's right that is what makes horror in video games so much different and in many ways more special than horror in movies. Because no matter what happens in a horror movie, right, you don't feel guilty for it happening. You can feel empathy to characters, you can feel awful for what happened to them, but you don't feel guilt. Fun fact, the entire movie, Michael Haneke movie, Funny Games, is a film specifically designed to make the audience feel guilty for watching a horror movie. That's why I refer to myself as having won the funny game, because there's a point in the movie where the guy in Funny Games turns to the audience and says, all of the horrible stuff that is happening to this family is only happening because you're continuing to watch it. You could turn this off at any time. And at that moment I said, you know what, German man, German version of Leopold and Loeb, you're right. I'm going to turn this movie off. And I did. So yes, I I think that he's very right about this, and while movies generally can't, no matter, despite Michael Haneke's efforts, movies have real trouble capturing that emotion and getting that across. Video games are great at it, and this is a really interesting observation because it's not something I see talked about a lot. Way to go, Will Byles. All right, and now we get to the final question, which is there anything else you want to tell players? And this is kind of inspiring to me to know that, like, Will Byles feels exactly the same way I do about interactive movies and video games in general. It's like that there's some of the best ways to, like, get story to people. The interactivity makes the stories that much more resonant. It can take a mediocre story and make it powerful, and it can make it a powerful story and turning it into something that just rocks your world. So I'm glad he feels the same way, and these new ads are constantly shifting the text around. Thanks for that, Bloody Disgusting. Format your ads better. You know what? Not what I'm here to talk about. He also pops in the accessibility factor. I mean, he doesn't get into it here, but he's like, yes, the most important thing for us is that everybody be able to play this game. And yeah, I think he's cracked it. Like, these various options to turn down the difficulty and make stuff optional, it's going to be a game changer opening these up. The problem is, like, is he going to communicate? Like, is there, well, not he, but is there going to be a way to communicate that to people who aren't necessarily jumping in to play these things? And I got to say, I have gotten, I have reviewed their games in the past, and I have seen, like, the review guides they send out. And if they are smart, they should heavily suggest that whoever, like, as they send out the copies of the game and the review guides, they should heavily suggest that people try out the accessibility modes. Because the problem is, when you're sending out a game to be reviewed, you're gonna send it to the kind of people who play that game. But the whole point of what they're doing here in the Quarry is trying to open this up to everybody. And I really think what they ought to do is say to the editors, and the editor's chief is, you're probably going to send this to the guy who covered House of Ashes, or the lady who covered Really Loves Until Dawn. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, but consider sending another code out and saying, ask someone on your staff or a freelancer or something who doesn't play interactive movies and is not particularly interested, but, like, kind of likes horror movies and doesn't play interactive movies and, like, doesn't really care about the decision-making stuff and the timed QT stuff, and just ask that person who wouldn't normally play this game to play the movie night version of it. Well, the movie mode version of it. To play around with the movie mode version and see how they experience, and write up a thing about that. Because, like, and that is a problem I think they're going to have with the marketing of this game, because they've got these new options that could open this game up to everybody. But are they going to get people to cover that, or is it just going to be horror nerds like me talking about how they liked it as an interactive movie, rather than someone who just watches horror movies and doesn't really play this kind of video game talking about their experiences directing their own movie by choosing character archetypes and who's good at QTs and who's not, and then just watching it all play out. I don't know if there's a way to do that, but I feel like consider opening up who you're sending this to, and not just sending it to people and insisting that, people who are familiar with your work play it. Like, send this out to everybody and encourage people who are not necessarily expert in any way, shape, or form at video games to use the movie mode. Like, I think that's the smartest thing they could do when they're doing their PR for this game. But hey, I've been wrong before. Anyway, that's it for the interviews. We were here for like an hour. If you stuck around to the end, thank you. I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. Special thanks go out to my patrons, Desire, Marissa, Eduardo, Brian, and Joanne. You can always find me at my live streams, weeknights at 9 Eastern and weekends at noon. We'll see you back here for more Supermassive Games content. But until then, au revoir.